Officers harassed a girl selling vegetables at a market. What she did next shocked everyone. She was just a quiet girl selling vegetables at the busy market, unnoticed and underestimated by everyone, especially the officers who decided to harass her that day. But what they didn't know was that behind her calm, humble exterior was the legacy of a legendary veteran, carried silently through years of discipline and quiet strength. At just 17 years old, she had inherited a lineage of resilience and skill few could imagine. When the officers confronted her, expecting an easy target, they triggered a chain of events that would shock the entire market and force everyone to confront the truth beneath the surface. This is the story of how a shy girl's silent presence silenced a room and reclaimed respect where it was long overdue. Just a quick little pause before I forget. If you like this kind of stories of overcoming adversity and justice, please leave a like and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to our channel so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. I guarantee you won't want to miss it. Now let's jump back in. The marketplace was already waking when Ava laid out her crates. Tomatoes, onions, and a handful of stubborn carrots she'd pulled from the frostbitten garden. Nothing impressive, nothing loud. Just fresh produce and a girl wrapped in her grandfather's old field jacket, sleeves rolled twice over her slender wrists. Vendors shouted over one another nearby, pushing discounts, claiming street corners like territory. But Ava stayed silent. She didn't bargain, didn't beg. She just sat. Her booth didn't even have a sign. Just vegetables, perfectly lined, and a small, handwritten tag. Local. No chemicals. The crowd flowed around her, most without stopping. Some glanced. Fewer lingered. Until they did. 2 officers, city patrol, were laughing when they walked by. Not cruel at first, just bored. The kind of bored that looks for something to stir. The taller one, badge crooked, pointed at her setup. "Hey, you got a permit for this, sweetheart?" Ava looked up, calmly. "It's residential grown," she said. "Just extras from the backyard." "Backyard?" The other officer scoffed, stepping closer. "This a charity drive or a business? Because if it's a business, you're about to have a problem." She didn't flinch, just returned to sorting her vegetables. No panic, no fear, just a quiet, composed girl under a canvas tarp while the city began to stare. The taller officer tapped the edge of her crate with his boot. "We're talking to you." Still, Ava didn't raise her voice. "I'm within municipal code. As long as I'm not obstructing." "Municipal code?" The second officer chuckled. "Oh, we've got a smart one." The people around began to slow. Conversations faltered. One vendor, 3 stalls down, watched in silence, mouth half open. Ava didn't break eye contact. But something shifted. A glint caught the morning light. A silver pin stitched on the inner lapel of her jacket. Faded. Easy to miss. An insignia not worn by civilians. It wasn't there as decoration. It was stitched, tucked just out of view, as if for memory, not display. The taller officer narrowed his eyes. For a moment, he paused, as if something about her posture or the way she didn't move pulled at an old discomfort. But then he laughed again, louder, forcing the tension away. "You've got 5 minutes to pack it up." Ava nodded once, but she didn't move. The officers didn't leave. They stood over her like bark stripped from a rotting tree, loud, brittle, trying to prove they still mattered. Ava continued adjusting the tomatoes, rotating them just slightly, as if their ripeness held more weight than the men above her. She moved with quiet precision. No fear, just rhythm. The kind of rhythm that didn't come from selling produce, but from something older, something taught. The taller officer shifted his weight. "You deaf?" he asked, louder this time, glancing at the growing number of eyes around them. "She heard you," murmured a voice nearby, an old woman with a cane and a bag of bruised pears. "She just doesn't flinch." That only seemed to irritate him more. He leaned down, put a hand on the edge of her table. "You think this is a game?" Ava finally spoke. "My grandfather taught me not to move just because someone raises their voice." The younger officer rolled his eyes. "Oh great, a philosopher now." But the taller one, his mouth twitched. "Your grandfather in the habit of teaching girls to ignore the law." Ava's fingers stopped. She met his eyes. Calm, measured. "He taught me to know the law," she said, "and to know the difference between power and authority." It was the kind of sentence that didn't belong to a teenager. The kind that came out practiced, not as defiance, but memory. The younger officer scoffed. "Who even is your grandfather?" Ava said nothing, but her hand slipped under the table and came back up with a worn ID badge, not hers. Laminated, cracked, faded from sun. She placed it gently beside the onions, like an offering. The name was barely legible, but the seal wasn't. Department of Defense. Special Forces, retired. The taller officer stared at it a moment too long. The younger one squinted. So what? She's a vet's granddaughter. That doesn't mean she gets to. But a voice cut him off. Deep. Slow. From a man across the road. Uniformed. Marine Corps insignia on his sleeve. That name, he said, walking toward them. Is that Ernest Calloway? Ava didn't answer. She didn't have to. The man exhaled, almost reverently. I served with him in Kandahar. The younger officer blinked. The older one paled slightly. Ava returned to her tomatoes, silent. Around her, the market had gone still, not frozen in fear, but listening, waiting. And Ava remained exactly where she was. The market didn't move. Not really. People still stood behind their booths, clutched paper bags, breathed. But everything had tilted. Somehow, the air felt thicker, slower, like the story had suddenly changed and no one had been told their new lines. The Marine, mid-50s, tall, eyes that had seen enough, stepped in front of Ava's stand. He didn't look at the vegetables. He looked at the badge, then at Ava, then slowly removed his own cap and held it at his side. You his kin? He asked, voice quiet. Ava nodded once. I knew he had a granddaughter. Didn't know she was back here. She said nothing, but her shoulders softened. Just slightly. The Marine turned to the officers. Do either of you have any idea who Ernest Calloway was? The younger one shrugged, trying to push the tension away. Doesn't matter who he was. She's violating. He was recon, the Marine cut in. Did 3 deployments nobody talks about. The kind where you leave with scars you can't show and medals they hand you behind closed doors. The taller officer cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. With respect, Sergeant. Master Gunnery Sergeant, the man corrected firmly. Retired, but not deaf. That silenced them for a beat. Ava, still seated, reached under the table again. This time, not for identification. She withdrew a small, folded cloth. Faded olive drab, edges worn thin. She opened it with care, revealing a single brass button, military issue, and a frayed patch bearing an airborne insignia. He left it to me, she said softly. Told me not to wear the weight unless I'd earned it, but to remember what it cost. Even the vendors weren't speaking now. The Marine swallowed, then nodded solemnly. You earn it by carrying it. Not just in combat. In how you stand when no one's watching. He turned back to the officers. And from where I'm standing, she's not the one out of line. The older officer glanced around, at the crowd, the Marine, the girl who hadn't once raised her voice, and stepped back. The younger one wasn't as fast. This is still public property. She can't just. But the Marine's tone dropped. Son, if this girl set up a table on top of my car, I'd still buy her tomatoes. There was no laughter, no cheering, just silence. And in it, Ava looked down at the vegetables again, as if the moment hadn't changed her at all. Ava didn't smile. Not when the Marine spoke. Not when the officers backed down. She wasn't here for spectacle. She just rotated a crate of carrots so the sun wouldn't bleach their tops. Quiet hands. Slow breath. Her silence felt deliberate, not cold, but ancient, like someone taught her to speak only when it would matter. The older officer mumbled something into his radio, then stepped away. The younger one lingered half a second longer, jaw tight, pride wounded. But the crowd's gaze weighed heavier than his badge, and eventually, he turned too. They disappeared down the far end of the market. The Marine remained, arms crossed. He watched her for a while, as if searching for something familiar. Then, with a soft grunt, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. For the carrots, he said, and the way you didn't flinch. Ava gave a small nod and passed him the produce without a word. He hesitated, then added, quietly, he was a legend. Your grandfather. Most people don't know what it means to move through a world where no one recognizes that anymore. Ava folded the cloth back around the patch and button, returning it beneath the table. I do, she said. The Marine studied her a moment longer. You're not in uniform, but you carry it. Every step. A young couple approached the stand tentatively, glancing at the retreating officers, then at the produce. Ava gave them the same calm attention she'd shown everyone before. Nothing special. Just dignity. Just readiness. They bought a handful of potatoes and left with murmured thanks. Behind her booth, tucked beneath a crate, was a rucksack. Old canvas. Military stitching. The name, Callaway, faintly written on the inner flap. Next to it, a field journal. Dog-eared. Notes in tight, blocky handwriting. Not hers. She hadn't touched it yet today. Didn't need to. Her posture alone told stories no one had earned the right to read yet. By midday, more people were approaching. Not because of pity, not even because of what had happened. They came because silence, when wrapped in earned respect, speaks louder than confrontation. And Ava, barely 17, daughter of a lost soldier and granddaughter to a man legend saluted in private, was the only one not performing. She simply was. By early afternoon, the rhythm of the market had mostly returned. Sellers barked prices, children tugged at sleeves for sweets, and tired shoppers weighed peaches with distant eyes. But something in the current had shifted. More people were stopping at Ava's stall now. A few to buy, most to observe. Quietly, with a strange mixture of caution and curiosity. They didn't know what they had witnessed, only that it felt important. And then came the break in the rhythm. A laugh, sharp, performative, cracked through the square. It belonged to Officer Duran. He was from a different district, not part of the morning incident, but word had spread fast. He sauntered through the crowd like a man itching for his own moment. Tin uniform stretched tight over the stomach of someone who hadn't run a beat in years. Mirrored sunglasses perched on his head like a crown. Well, he said loudly, arms spread like a showman. This the famous carrot stand that's got half the department whispering? Ava didn't react. She was gently arranging small bundles of cilantro with a cord she'd repurposed from an old tent strap. Duran kept going. Didn't know you could scare off city officers just by playing dead and quoting your granddaddy's stories. The market grew still again. He reached out and picked up a tomato, held it like it was evidence. Let me guess. These are hand-picked by ghosts and washed in combat valor. A small ripple of unease moved through the onlookers. Ava didn't even look up, but her hand stopped, fingers resting on the table edge. That was the first shift. Duran leaned closer. You know what I see, he said. A girl playing dress-up, wearing a jacket she didn't earn, name-dropping a man who did the work for her. Still no reaction. And that was the second shift. Because people had seen Ava's silence before, had seen what it meant. And now, they were watching him, not her. Duran scoffed, mistaking the stillness for weakness. You want to sell vegetables, fine. But don't act like you're above the rules because you got a patch and a bedtime story. That's when Ava moved. Not fast, not angry, just deliberately. She reached beneath the table and lifted the field journal, laid it flat beside the tomato he was still holding. The cover bore no decoration, only 3 words written in thick, permanent ink. Observe, endure, respond. Duran squinted. What's that? Ava finally looked at him. It's not a story, she said quietly. It's a manual. Duran stared at the field journal as if expecting it to explain itself. But it didn't. It just lay there, frayed corners, a coffee stain from some past bivouac, and that writing on the cover. No embellishment. No decoration. Just those 3 words. Observe, endure, respond. Ava didn't touch it. She didn't need to. That's some kind of motto, he asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. Sounds like something a therapist writes on a sticky note. But the man beside him, a former corpsman, still in dusty boots, shifted uncomfortably. His eyes had locked on the journal with recognition. It's a recon field book, the corpsman murmured, more to himself than anyone. Real one. You don't fake those. Ava's hand moved slightly across the table, revealing a single entry near the edge of the page. Duran glanced down, his brow furrowed. Tight, deliberate handwriting. Proximity patrol compromised. Low profile until shift passes. Avoid engagement unless necessary. Remember, precision over reaction. Strength lives in stillness. Duran blinked. Whose journal is this? He asked, quieter now. Ava didn't answer, but behind her silence, something in the air thickened, like the heat before a storm. The kind that makes even seasoned men feel like rookies again. The corpsman stepped closer. He looked at Ava, then at the insignia on her jacket's lapel. Quietly, almost reverently, he asked, "He ever talk about the Valley holdout? South Ridge Line, 2009. Ava nodded once. That was my unit, the corpsman whispered. He saved my life. We lost 2 men that day. Thought we were done. Then your grandfather walked us out. Alone. He turned to the crowd. He didn't just lead missions. He carried men. Now Duran looked unsure of his footing. The performative smirk cracked slightly. Look, no one's trying to discredit a veteran, he said, awkward now. Just saying maybe the girl shouldn't be. She's not just a girl, the corpseman said, his tone cutting through the market like a blade. She's blood. Of someone who bled for people like you. Duran's mouth opened, then closed. Ava gently closed the journal and slid it beneath the table again. The act wasn't dramatic, but it felt like thunder. One mother nearby handed her a small bill without asking for change. A boy placed an apple back on the table and whispered, "Sorry." And in that silence, the kind you can only earn, Ava turned back to her bundles. Duran walked away without another word, and no one followed. The market didn't speak of Duran after he left. Not out loud, but his absence lingered, like smoke after a fire. People had seen something they didn't understand, something quiet that still managed to change the air around it. Ava resumed her work with the same patience as before. She didn't gloat, didn't shift her posture to take up more space. If anything, she folded herself further inward, tucking the edges of the journal away, pressing the cloth over the field patch like it was glass. But eyes followed her now, not in mockery, not even awe, in uncertainty, in respect. A woman who ran the honey stall across the way, the one who hadn't looked up once all morning, now approached with 2 jars in her arms. She set them down without a word, then nodded toward Ava's carrots. Trade. Ava considered for only a second, then nodded. The woman gave a half-smile, but didn't linger. She didn't ask questions, didn't gossip. Just returned to her booth and faced her own customers with a different posture than before. Then came the butcher's apprentice. 17 as well, maybe 18. Broad shoulders, calloused hands. He'd watched the morning unfold without saying a word. Now he stepped forward, awkwardly holding a paper tray with 2 skewers of grilled beef. He didn't speak at first, just offered them like a peace treaty. For lunch, he muttered. Ava blinked once, uncertain. He added, I didn't say anything earlier. I should have. She accepted the tray gently, nodded in thanks. No anger passed between them. No punishment needed. But something shifted behind his eyes, a quiet kind of respect not taught, only learned. Other vendors followed. Not in a crowd, not in ceremony. Just one by one. A roll of bread. A cloth napkin. A small folding stool someone insisted she use, though she never sat. And amidst it all, the corpseman lingered nearby, not watching her like a guard, but like someone standing in reverence at a monument too personal to name. You carry him well, he said once under his breath. Ava didn't answer, didn't need to, because the crowd, even without words, had started to see. Not the name, not the patch, but the discipline, the presence, that earned silence. And they didn't need an explanation anymore. They just needed to remember how to listen. The rhythm of the market beat softer now. It wasn't slower. People still moved, bought, bartered. But the noise had changed. The sharpness had dulled, like everyone was walking through a place they suddenly knew deserved more care. Ava moved the same as before. But now, every motion felt seen. Even the way she folded her produce bags, with neat creases, tight corners, and a small loop to keep them from opening, spoke of training. Not store training. Not customer service. Field training. Efficiency without waste. Hands that had packed gear in the dark, that had memorized how to tie off wounds and stack ammunition with their eyes closed. She hadn't lived that life. Not directly, but every inch of her behavior said she'd been raised by it. The corpseman, still lingering nearby, finally approached again. This time, not as a witness, as someone seeking answers. I served with your grandfather, he began, voice lower than before. But he never talked much. Just kept that journal and watched everything. Ava didn't look up. He watched more than he spoke, she said softly. Said words could become armor for the wrong people. The corpseman exhaled. Sounds like him. He leaned on the crate beside her, glancing over the remaining vegetables. Then, after a beat, you train? Ava didn't nod, didn't confirm. She simply set down her knife, a short paring blade, worn at the handle, and tucked it into a pouch at her hip. Not for security, for discipline. The way one stores tools, not weapons. That answers it, he murmured. From the corner of the square, a teenage boy with a phone watched them closely. He wasn't filming. Not now. But he'd seen what happened earlier. His face carried the look of someone who didn't understand the rules anymore, as if the lines between civilian and authority had blurred. He finally walked up and asked, "Are you, like, special forces or something?" Ava met his eyes, gently. "No, but your grandpa was?" She nodded. The boy paused. "And you learned from him?" I listened. He chewed on that, nodded slowly. "Okay." Then he turned and left, quietly, because even the young, the ones raised on noise, could recognize what lived beneath silence when they saw it. And Ava? She just kept sorting tomatoes, not for performance, but for the principle of doing things right. Later that afternoon, as clouds crept in from the west, Ava found a moment between customers. She crouched beneath the table, resting her hands on the old rucksack like it could still breathe. And for a moment it did. The canvas was sun-bleached, one strap repaired with thread the same color as her jacket. Inside were only a few things: the journal, a sealed envelope, and a laminated photo, aged at the corners, but still whole. In the photo, her grandfather stood in desert fatigues, arms around two other soldiers. None of them smiled, but their eyes held the weight of men who had made it home while others hadn't. Behind them, a Humvee smoldered in the dust. Ava studied it like scripture. The market sounds faded as memory took hold. She was 6. Rain fell sideways against the roof of the cabin. She sat at the table, legs swinging beneath her chair. Her grandfather stood at the sink, sharpening a blade with calm, practiced strokes. "Why don't you smile in pictures?" she asked him. He didn't answer right away. Then, "Smiles are for peace. But we carry the ones who didn't come home." He turned and handed her the blade, blunt side first, and pointed to a potato. "Cut slow, like you're remembering someone." Even then, she didn't fully understand. But she never forgot the way he looked out the window, eyes tracking movement no one else could see. Back in the present, Ava gently folded the photo again and placed it in the inner pocket of her jacket. The wind had picked up now, carried the scent of cooked meat, rosemary, and exhaust. Normal market smells, but layered with something else today. Respect. Not the loud kind. The kind earned in inches, not miles. She returned to her feet. The crowd had thinned slightly, the rush of the lunch hour fading into afternoon lull. A few eyes still trailed her movements, but no one approached for a while, until an older man with a limp shuffled forward. He wore no uniform, no medals, just a battered cane and tired eyes. He looked at her stall, then at her, studied the jacket, the rucksack, her silence, then, without a word, reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded patch, fabric worn so thin it looked like paper. He placed it on the table. 5th Infantry Division, Vietnam era. From one shadow walker to another, he said. Ava didn't speak. She only nodded, slow, with both hands gently pressing the patch to the wood as if anchoring it to the earth. Because even memory, when carried properly, can hold the weight of legacy. The patch stayed on the table longer than any of the vegetables. People passed by without touching it. Some noticed. Fewer asked. But those who knew didn't need to. The older man with the limp gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, then walked away, disappearing into the foot traffic like a leaf in a river. No fanfare, just history returning to silence. Ava stood for a long moment, her hand still resting on the patch. And then she opened the journal. Not all the way, just a few pages. She ran a finger down a column of neatly written notes. Coordinates, survival instructions. Then something else, more personal. An entry dated 1 week before his final hospital stay. The girl sees more than she says. That's good. Words cost more than they earn these days. But I worry what silence does to someone so young. She needs to know when to speak, not just when to wait. That's the line. The line between shadow and leader. Ava closed the book. She knew what he meant. She knew exactly what he meant. There had been a time, after the funeral, after the folded flag, after the wooden box, when she thought silence was armor. That if she just stayed quiet long enough, no one could find the soft spots. But her grandfather hadn't raised her to disappear. He raised her to listen until it was time to be heard. The difference mattered. She looked out at the square again, at the crowd that now moved around her differently. Slower, more careful. Conversations still happened, but voices were lower. Children still ran, but they didn't scream. Something had settled over the market like a soft blanket. Ava straightened the rows of produce again. Then, quietly, She picked up the 5th Infantry patch and pinned it beside the faded recon insignia on her jacket. She didn't press it for attention, didn't stand taller, just wore it, not to signal, but to honor. And as she turned to lift a box from beneath the table, her sleeves shifted, revealing, for the first time, a faint scar running just below her wrist. Clean, surgical, old. Someone in the crowd noticed. And the whispers began again. Not rumors, reckonings. Because no one leaves a scar like that by accident. And no one carries themselves like Ava did unless they'd already survived the kind of storm most people don't come back from. A man watched her. He wasn't from the market. That much was clear. His shoes were polished. His shirt too crisp. And his hands, they were clean. Not the kind of clean that comes from washing. The kind that comes from not working. He stood across the square under the shade of a narrow tree. Arms crossed, sunglasses on, not looking directly at her, but always angled just enough to see. Ava noticed. She didn't react. She simply shifted her body slightly, enough to keep him in her periphery, but not enough to make it look deliberate. The corpseman noticed too. He moved from the edge of the fruit stall, closer to her table again, his body relaxed but ready. Like a man who had learned the hard way how to anticipate things without giving them power. "You see him?" he asked, voice low. "I see everyone," Ava replied. That was true. She always had. The man didn't move, didn't buy anything, just observed. But pressure, that builds slowly. Like water under steel. The crack only shows once it's too late to fix. And Ava could feel it now. Something about this wasn't random. A few more shoppers passed. A teenage girl asked for garlic. Ava handed her the freshest bulb without speaking. The girl thanked her twice, then left quickly, casting a glance at the man near the tree on her way out. The corpseman shifted his stance. "You think he's here for you?" he asked. Ava didn't answer. Instead, she reached under the table and removed a tightly rolled canvas from her rucksack. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing an old brass compass, a grease pencil, and a laminated terrain map marked in red grid lines. The corpseman's eyebrows lifted. "Recon map." Ava nodded. "Why bring that to a vegetable stall?" Her answer came soft. "He told me to never go anywhere without knowing where I've been." "Smart," he said. Then, after a beat, "And where you'd run." "I don't run," she replied. The man across the square finally moved, walking slowly toward the center of the market. Not toward Ava. Not yet. Just orbiting. Watching. Waiting. Ava calmly rolled the map and returned it beneath the table. Then, without urgency, she adjusted the position of a box of potatoes, not because they needed shifting, but because it gave her a better sight line. She wasn't afraid. But trained people don't wait for fear to make them move. They read the air. And Ava could feel the storm approaching. The man who had been watching finally stepped closer, his polished shoes crunching softly on the cracked pavement. His eyes, sharp and cold behind dark lenses, locked onto Ava with a weight that demanded attention, but not respect. "Selling vegetables here without a permit," he said, voice low and clipped. "You're causing a disturbance. This market has rules, young lady." Ava looked up, steady and unflinching. Her gaze didn't waver. "I'm within city code," she replied calmly. "No obstruction. No permits required for residential produce sales under 5 pounds. He scoffed, clearly irritated by her knowledge, folding his arms. "Do you even know who I am?" She met his gaze evenly. "No." He paused, almost surprised she didn't recognize him. "Sergeant Mullen. City Code Enforcement. I'm the one who enforces the rules." The crowd nearby tensed. The usual hum of market chatter slowed to a murmur, as if everyone suddenly understood that this was no ordinary argument. Ava's silence was a kind of answer, one that spoke volumes without words. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to plead or argue. Her calm was a shield stronger than any armor. "You can't just set up shop wherever you please," Mullen said, taking a step closer, his tone sharper now. "You'll pack up, or I'll have you removed by force." The corpseman, who had been standing quietly nearby, shifted his stance slightly, alert but restrained. Ava noticed, but held up a hand, not to stop him, but to show she was ready to face this herself. "Sergeant Mullen," she said quietly but firmly, "this isn't about permits or territory. It's about respect, about the right to exist here without harassment." Mullen's eyes flicked to the faded insignia pinned on her jacket, but his face betrayed nothing. His mouth tightened. "I don't care about your legacy," he said coldly. You still need to comply. Ava's fingers brushed the edge of the table, curling lightly around the worn field journal she kept hidden beneath the cloth. She felt the familiar texture, the weight of history in her hand. Her voice remained calm and measured, every word deliberate. But sometimes, she said, the right to stand isn't given. It's earned. The crowd shifted uneasily. A few faces exchanged glances. No one moved, but everyone waited, breath held in collective anticipation. They sensed this wasn't about permits anymore. This was something older, something deeper, and something more dangerous. Because beneath her quiet exterior, Ava carried the discipline of a warrior, a legacy of resilience and unyielding strength. And though her words were soft, they resonated like a drumbeat warning that this stand would not be broken by empty threats. The market seemed to hold its breath, as if time itself had slowed. Sergeant Mullen's face had lost its usual smugness. His lips pressed into a thin line, eyes flicking nervously over the growing crowd. The weight of silence hung heavy, not just between him and Ava, but over everyone watching. Ava remained calm, every movement measured and deliberate. She reached beneath the table with the quiet confidence of someone who had practiced this motion countless times. Her fingers closed around the worn leather cover of a field journal, weathered, stained, and cracked at the edges. Pulling it out, she placed it on the table and opened to a marked page, revealing tight, meticulous handwriting and a collection of sketches, tactical maps, coded signals, and survival notes. Without breaking eye contact, she reached to her hip and drew a small, expertly crafted knife from a leather sheath. Not large or menacing, but balanced perfectly for precision. The blade gleamed softly in the sunlight, an extension of her calm, silent strength. I'm not here to argue, Ava said softly, voice steady and unwavering. But I am trained to respond when necessary. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The gathered market-goers shifted, leaning forward slightly, drawn by something deeper than the surface conflict. This wasn't a fight of volume or force. It was a demonstration of control, discipline, and legacy. Mullen's gaze darted from the journal to the blade, then to the insignia pinned on Ava's jacket, the faded, embroidered patches of a military past that weighed heavily despite her youth. My grandfather's legacy isn't just a story, Ava continued, voice low but commanding. It's discipline, precision, the quiet burden of responsibility. I carry it silently, but I carry it nonetheless. Her words hung in the air, powerful without needing to shout. For the first time, Mullen's arrogance cracked. His eyes narrowed, weighing the room, the girl before him, and the growing realization among the witnesses. He took a slow step back, the calculated threat fading. The crowd exhaled as tension released. Some wiped tears silently. Others exchanged looks of respect and awe. A child clung tighter to a parent's hand. The market had witnessed something rare. Quiet strength and undeniable dignity reclaiming its space without violence. Ava closed the journal carefully and slid the knife back into its sheath, her movements as composed as ever. She turned back to her vegetables. No triumph, no boast, only the steady rhythm of work and presence. Her silence had spoken louder than any shout could have. And in that moment, everyone understood why. The stunned silence lingered, hanging heavy like a thick fog that refused to lift. The murmurs, tentative at first, grew softer, not from confusion, but from a collective shift in the crowd's energy. Sergeant Mullen had retreated toward the edge of the market, his face unreadable beneath the shade of his cap. He had arrived with authority, expecting compliance, intimidation, perhaps even submission. Instead, he found himself confronted by something he hadn't anticipated, a quiet, unshakable presence, one forged not in volume or force, but in years of discipline and unspoken sacrifice. Ava's hands moved back to the tomatoes with practiced ease, her motions steady and unhurried. There was no need for triumph, no thirst for spectacle. Her quiet dignity filled the space with a calm that resonated louder than any shout. From the back of the crowd, a figure stepped forward, a man in his mid-30s, wiry and worn, carrying the unmistakable stance of a military veteran. His eyes searched Ava's face before he spoke. I served with your grandfather, he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of memory. Ernest Calloway, a man who taught me more about discipline honor, and sacrifice than any drill sergeant I ever had. Ava gave a subtle nod, acknowledging the connection without words. The man continued, his tone reverent. He was a legend among us, not because of medals or speeches, but because of the way he carried every burden with silent strength. And you? He looked around at the growing crowd. You carry that legacy not with pride or arrogance, but with purpose and quiet resilience. The crowd shifted, the atmosphere transforming. Faces that had been skeptical now softened with newfound respect. The mother who had earlier handed Ava coins, the boy who had quietly returned an apple, the vendor who offered her a stool, all now shared a silent reverence. The corpsman lingered close by, his eyes soft but vigilant. He leaned in, voice low but certain. You don't need to raise your voice. Your actions are already speaking volumes. They're listening. Ava's lips curved in the faintest of smiles, almost imperceptible, and she gave a slow nod. Recognition, genuine recognition, isn't granted by titles, badges, or loud declarations. It is earned in the silent moments, the steady bearing of one who carries the weight of history, the quiet strength of endurance, and the calm presence of a warrior who has been tested and never broken. And here, in the heart of a bustling market filled with noise and haste, that quiet strength shone brighter than any badge or proclamation ever could. The marketplace began to hum again, but the energy had shifted. It was softer now, more reflective. The chatter that had once drowned out Ava's quiet presence now seemed to make room for her, as if the crowd had collectively stepped back to honor an unspoken truth. Ava returned to her task, fingers deftly tying small bundles of parsley and carrots. Her movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. Each fold, each placement of a vegetable, carried the weight of discipline, a silent testament to the legacy she bore. There was no celebration in her demeanor, no victory dance, just the quiet resilience of someone who had learned that true strength is often invisible. The retired officer who had earlier spoken lingered nearby, his gaze softening with a mix of pride and understanding. He watched Ava with the same respect reserved for the most steadfast warriors, the ones who carry their scars beneath the surface and their burdens with humility. Around the market, other vendors cautiously approached, offering small gestures, a loaf of bread wrapped in a cloth, a jug of cool water, a pair of worn gloves left behind at a neighboring stall. Each gift was a silent acknowledgement, a quiet solidarity born from witnessing something rare and profound. Sergeant Mullen had disappeared, retreating from the scene without a word. The space he left behind was no longer filled with hostility or threat, but with respect, a respect that had been earned not through confrontation, but through the demonstration of quiet authority. Nearby, a young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Mom," he whispered, "who is that girl? She's different." The mother's smile was gentle, tinged with understanding. "She's someone who carries a legacy you can't see, but you can feel." Ava's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where storm clouds gathered, the air thickening with the scent of impending rain. She crouched beneath the table and pulled out the worn field journal again. Carefully, she flipped to a folded photograph tucked inside, a faded black-and-white image of her grandfather standing tall and solemn, battle lines etched into his face and bearing the weight of countless sacrifices. Her fingers traced the worn edges of the photo, feeling the silent stories carried within it. This was more than a keepsake. It was a compass for the path she walked. Slowly, she closed the journal and tucked it beneath the table once more, securing it like a sacred trust. Her eyes lifted, meeting the corpsman's steady gaze. No words passed between them, but in that glance, an entire conversation was held, of legacy, of duty, and of the quiet power that had silently reshaped the market that day. Amidst the renewed hum of life, the bustle and the barter, Ava stood rooted in her place, a living testament to strength that requires no spotlight, a legacy carried forward with unwavering presence. The kind of strength that doesn't shout. It simply is. The market's restless murmur gradually softened, settling into a profound stillness that felt less like absence and more like reverence. The crowd, once a sea of skeptical and curious faces, now moved with an unspoken respect, as though something unseen but deeply felt had shifted the very atmosphere. Vendors exchanged glances, their earlier doubts dissolving into cautious understanding. The woman who had handed Ava coins that morning now offered a quiet smile, the corners of her eyes crinkling with newfound warmth. The butcher's apprentice, who had once watched silently from the sidelines, gave a subtle nod as he passed by, his calloused hands clutching a small package of smoked meat, a tacit gift of acknowledgement. Even the children who had been loud and boisterous just moments before seemed to sense the change, their playfulness tempered with a newfound gentleness as they darted through the stalls. Ava stood behind her table, a pillar of calm composure. The faint scar along her wrist caught a brief glimmer of sunlight as she adjusted a neatly bundled bunch of herbs. Her eyes swept the market square, not with arrogance or pride, but with the steady assurance of someone grounded in a legacy far greater than herself, a legacy built on quiet discipline, endurance, and an unyielding presence. The corpseman remained close at hand, a steady guardian of sorts, but the truth was clear: Ava no longer needed protection. She had reclaimed her place here, not through confrontation or loud declarations, but through the undeniable gravity of her presence. From the edge of the crowd, an elderly woman emerged. Her face was weathered, etched with the lines of hardship and wisdom, yet her eyes shone with a clarity and kindness that immediately commanded attention. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and placed a small, hand-carved wooden cross on Ava's table. "For your protection," the woman said softly, her voice trembling just slightly. "My brother served alongside your grandfather. He always said strength isn't found in noise or spectacle. It's in the quiet moments, the ones no one else sees." Ava accepted the cross with a gentle nod, her fingers closing around the carved wood as if clutching a talisman forged from memory and honor. Slowly, the market's familiar clamor returned, the rhythmic calls of vendors, the shuffle of feet, the occasional laughter, but the tone was forever altered. It was softer, more attentive, marked by a collective awareness that this place had witnessed something rare and sacred. Sergeant Mullen was nowhere to be seen. Whatever authority he represented had been eclipsed by a far greater power, truth, and quiet strength. And Ava? She continued her work with unshakable dignity, carrying forward a legacy that required no spotlight, only presence. The sun lowered toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the bustling market square. Light filtered through fluttering awnings, dappling the stalls in golden hues. Ava's presence no longer invited questions or suspicion, but commanded a respectful calm that spread through the crowd like a gentle tide. Voices had returned, but were subdued, weighted with reflection. The boy who had once whispered to his mother now stood a little taller, watching Ava with quiet admiration. Nearby, a group of vendors exchanged knowing glances, their earlier doubts replaced with appreciation for the strength that did not shout, but simply was. The corpseman remained near, his eyes alert yet relaxed. He exchanged a brief, meaningful nod with Ava, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forged not by words, but by shared experience and unspoken understanding. Ava's gaze swept over the market, her stance relaxed but unyielding. The faint scars on her wrist peeked out as she brushed back a stray lock of hair, subtle reminders of battles fought and survived beyond this civilian square. No one approached to challenge her anymore. No raised voices. No demands. Instead, the market embraced her quiet authority. An older man, once skeptical, approached hesitantly. His hands were rough, marked by years of labor, but his eyes were steady. He reached into his pocket and produced a small pin, an emblem from a long-disbanded unit. Without a word, he placed it gently beside Ava's produce. The gesture spoke volumes: recognition, honor, a passing of unspoken respect from one who understood sacrifice to another who carried its legacy. Ava accepted the pin with a slow, deliberate nod. No words were exchanged, none were needed. Her quiet strength said everything. As twilight deepened, the market began to close, vendors packing up their stalls, customers filtering away. Ava gathered her belongings with calm efficiency, the day's trials now behind her. But the legacy she carried would never leave. It was etched not only in scars or medals, but in the silent moments, in every measured breath, every steady step. And as she disappeared down the narrow street, her silhouette framed by the fading light, the market remained changed, forever marked by the quiet dignity of a girl who had silenced doubt without uttering a single shout. The market was winding down as the sun began its slow descent, casting long, golden shadows across the worn cobblestones. Vendors methodically folded canvas tents and packed wooden crates, their chatter reduced to low murmurs that blended with the soft rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. The vibrant energy that had charged the air all day gradually softened into a tranquil calm. Ava moved with deliberate grace, carefully arranging the last bundles of herbs and vegetables. Each motion was steady, measured, a quiet ritual of closure that mirrored the inner peace she was beginning to feel. There was no hurry. The storm that had passed through the market earlier had left an imprint deeper than words, and she was still processing its weight. Beneath the table, her fingers found the smooth wooden cross the elderly woman had given her hours before. The cross was cool against her skin, the subtle carvings worn from time, a tactile reminder of legacy and protection. It grounded her, a link to something larger than herself, a lineage forged in sacrifice and silent strength. The corpseman was nearby, packing his own gear with practiced efficiency. His eyes met Ava's a few times, each glance heavy with understanding but without need for speech. Between them, a quiet acknowledgement hung in the air. Today was not just another day selling produce. It was a reclamation of respect, of dignity, of history. The scent of earth and distant rain hung in the air, promising a coming storm. The first low rumbles of thunder rolled faintly over the rooftops, echoing the subtle pulse of tension still lingering beneath the surface. Ava pulled her jacket tighter, feeling the familiar weight of the faded patches sewn onto the fabric, marks of battles fought long ago, stories told in silence. She paused for a moment, looking out over the emptying market square. The place was quiet now, devoid of the curious eyes and hushed whispers that had filled it earlier. No one was watching anymore, and yet the memory of the day's events lingered like a shadow, a quiet testament to what had been witnessed. Ava straightened her posture and lifted her worn field journal, carefully slipping it back into her bag. She adjusted her sleeves, hiding the faint scars along her wrists, invisible reminders of battles fought, both seen and unseen. As she stepped away from the stall, the market's heartbeat slowed, but its rhythm had changed irrevocably. The presence she had carried silently throughout the day left an indelible mark, one that would resonate long after the last vendor had closed shop. Because some silences speak louder than words. Because some legacies require no audience. Because true strength, quiet, steadfast, enduring, is the kind that never fades. The evening deepened, and the market's last few visitors began to drift away, their footsteps fading down narrow alleys and cobblestone streets. The vibrant day had turned to twilight, soft shadows dancing beneath the flickering street lamps. Ava gathered her belongings slowly, the worn field journal and the wooden cross safely tucked into her bag. Her eyes lingered for a moment on the empty stall, the space that had been her quiet battleground and sanctuary all in one. As she rose, a soft voice called out from behind. "Wait." She turned to see the elderly woman who had gifted her the cross earlier. In her hand was a small, wrapped bundle. "For you," the woman said, stepping forward with a gentle smile. "A token of thanks and of remembrance." Ava accepted the package with careful hands. Inside was a faded photograph, framed in delicate wood. Her grandfather, standing tall and proud, the same solemn gaze that Ava had inherited. The woman's eyes held a quiet understanding. "He taught us what it means to stand when the world tries to push you down. You carry that same strength. Never forget it." Ava's lips pressed into a soft line. She nodded, words unnecessary. Around them, the market lay peaceful, the day's tensions finally settling into a shared memory, one that would live quietly in the hearts of those who had witnessed. As Ava turned to leave, a small group of vendors emerged from their stalls, offering nods of respect and quiet smiles. No fanfare, no applause, just a shared recognition that transcended words. In that moment, Ava felt the weight she carried shift, lighter now, not because the burden had lessened, but because it was honored. And as she stepped into the night, the legacy she bore glowed softly, a steady flame that would never be extinguished. Night had fully embraced the town, wrapping its velvet cloak around the quiet streets. Stars began to flicker high above, distant and steady, like silent witnesses to the world below. The market square, now empty and still, held only the faint echoes of the days unfolding. A story told not in loud voices or grand gestures, but in the quiet shifts of presence and respect. Ava moved through the shadows with purpose, her footsteps soft but assured. The wooden cross and worn field journal nestled safely in her bag, tangible reminders of the legacy she carried, a legacy born of sacrifice, discipline, and silent strength. Each step she took felt like a thread weaving her own story into the long tapestry of those who had walked before her. Passing dimly lit windows, she caught glimpses of faces, some familiar, some strangers, each unknowingly touched by the subtle force of dignity she had reclaimed. No one had shouted her name or celebrated her deeds with fanfare, yet a profound respect had been earned. It hung in the air, palpable and unspoken, in every glance and every nod exchanged in the market that day. Ava paused near a small, weathered memorial tucked within a quiet garden, a tribute to those who had served quietly and faithfully, their sacrifices often overlooked by the world. She reached out, her fingers tracing the cool metal of the plaque, the words worn but clear. For a moment, the weight of history settled upon her like a mantle, mingling with hope and resolve. Her grandfather's spirit, and those of countless others, lived on in her steady breath, in her measured steps, in the unyielding strength that did not need to shout to be heard. She lifted her chin slightly, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of a distant street lamp. There was no cheering crowd, no applause ringing through the night, just the enduring truth that some stories, the deepest, most vital stories, are told best without words. True honor is not something you claim. It is something quietly recognized. The strongest legacy is the one that endures in silence. Unseen, perhaps, by many, but unbroken. And in that enduring silence, Ava found her place. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive tactical stories.